Hi, I'm Niall Paterson, and today we wanted to update you on the earthquakes that affected tens of miles along the Syria-Turkey border.
In southern Turkey, buildings crumble like sand. Obliterated by some of the worst earthquakes in a century.
We aren't now more than a month on from the natural disaster in which tens of thousands of people lost their lives. But for those who survived, the aftershocks aren't just measured on the Richter scale.
The critical first 48 hours has come and gone, and hope is turning into grief.
In Turkey, more than 1.5 million living in the disaster zone are still without shelter. In Syria, where civil war has raged for years, aid was slow to arrive. Cholera was not. And as always, it is the children who suffer most. They'll be our focus on this edition of The Daily.
You see these images on TV before you come out here, and you see the level of destruction, and you think, well, that must be one area, one street, one road. And as we were driving into Antakya in Hatay, you realize that it is block after block after block.
Joe English works with UNICEF, the United Nations agency that focuses on humanitarian aid to children. He has spent the past 3 weeks working between Turkey and Syria.
And honestly, I've been doing this job for 5 years. I've been all around the world, and I have never seen anything like it. It knocked me sideways. And it's hard to imagine how anyone honestly survived.
Tell me exactly what you saw then, Joe.
Buildings just completely flattened, pancaked, buildings ripped in half. We visited one school where the entire rear of the school was gone. So you walked into classrooms and they were just open to rubble for about as far as you could see. The city is, I was there 3 years ago for work, and I saw it, and it is a beautiful city, and it is a diverse city. And it's hard to see how families will be able to move back in the near term. You speak to families and they have no idea how they're going to be able to rebuild their lives in the short term at all. It is just about survival in the days and weeks ahead before I think they even have the headspace to begin to contemplate what comes next.
When you say that the rebuilding it seems a distant prospect to you, is that just because of the scale of the destruction, or because of the location in which you were, the difficulties in getting the materials that you would need to put this place back on its feet?
I think it's the scale of the destruction. There are many, many, many homes that are completely destroyed. There are many more that are damaged, but families are terrified about the idea of going back to these homes, even to try and go and salvage some of their belongings, because aftershocks continue. All of us here have an app on our phone that gives us a notification anytime there's an aftershock. And some of them, 4.2, 4.4, you may barely notice, but we have, 5.2 just a few days ago, and that, that gave me pause for thought. I was just getting up, and it's scary. And so for children who have been through this, who went through the first 2 catastrophic earthquakes, were then forced from their homes, a week later 2 more. So you can just imagine how this compounds these distressing experiences and leaves children just completely on edge, completely unable to focus on anything beyond, this fear of is my world going to be turned upside down again?
Tell me about some of the children that you met, because of course, the parents, the mothers, the fathers, those that were lucky enough to survive, their priority is keeping their child alive. Food, water, shelter. There can't be a lot of living on top of that.
No, completely. And turning to Syria, in Jindaris, I was there just yesterday, And the city has a much lower profile in terms of the height of the buildings compared to Antakya. But the damage to the buildings that were there was just as severe. But the reality is that many families in Syria aren't living in buildings, especially in northwest Syria. They're living in tents because they have been displaced not once or twice, but multiple times by the conflict. We're now approaching 12 years of conflict. There was one young boy I was speaking to earlier this week called Majid, and he was 9 years old. And his entire childhood, 9 years, has been spent set against this backdrop of airstrikes and displacement, and once again being forced from his home, once again his mum having to explain to him why they can't stay where they are. And so for children like Majid, this is just the latest catastrophe. And, we always say that children are resilient, but we have to give them the tools to be resilient. We have to give them the space to feel safe and feel secure in themselves and in their lives for that resilience to have any effect whatsoever.
I mean, presumably some of these children have not just spent, recent times in these tents. They have spent large parts of their life.
Their entire lives, for many of them. It's hard to see how these children are going to be able to not only rebuild their lives, but their communities. Ultimately, once there is, hopefully, at some point, a peaceful solution in Syria, this is the generation of children who are going to have to rebuild the country. And when I was speaking to Majid and his younger brother, Bara, I was asking them what they wanted to do when they grow up. And Majid said that he wanted to be a doctor, and Bara said he wanted to be an engineer. And I thought that's such a specific, dream for a child. But then you look around you and you think they want to be able to help the people that they see every day. They want to be doctors so that they can, help heal people who are injured, whether it's by the earthquake or by the conflict. They want to be engineers because, they've seen their cities destroyed over and over again, whether it's by fighting in the conflict or by these kind of horrific natural disasters. And children often see the world around them and focus on how they could make it more to something that would offer a better future for them. And so I think that's what these children are doing, and we have to, as the international community, be providing them with the ability to do that. And that means education. It means safe places to live and to exist. Otherwise, there's very little hope.
Has there been any assistance from the Syrian government, the Syrian regime itself?
We work in all areas of Syria, and we work with everyone that we have to in terms of reaching children. My focus whilst I've been here has been the situation in the northwest. And there, obviously, the vast majority of international support of humanitarian aid has been coming in across from the Turkish side, from the border. But, we've been doing this for a long time. We know how to do this. We had, even before the earthquake, thankfully, supplies pre-positioned, over $6 million worth of supplies, including supplies to ensure that people can get access to safe drinking water, hygiene supplies, highly nutritious biscuits for children. But, we know that the needs are huge, and whilst trucks of humanitarian aid is getting in, we know that we need more.
And I suppose also the problem for you, your colleagues, is the fact that, in the aftermath of a natural disaster like this, unsanitary conditions, dysentery, cholera, these are all entirely predictable outcomes.
They are indeed, and it is a sad irony that, you can speak to a child who has lived through 12 years of war, 4 catastrophic earthquakes, tens of thousands of aftershocks, and the thing which could be the biggest risk to them right now is a glass of water. This is just beyond belief, and so getting in, providing that water. At the moment, we're trucking water into many communities, which is hugely expensive and can only be a short-term measure. But we're also working with the authorities to repair water systems so that there is a long-term, more sustainable solution. But we only have this access into northwest Syria for a short period of time at the moment. We hope that it will be extended because we can't help families rebuild their lives in the next couple of months. It is going to be a long-term effort.
Where do you think the northwest of Syria will be a month from now? We're, of course, a month on from the quakes themselves. But from what you're saying, pretty much where they are now.
Families there are resilient. They have got used to having to survive often, in these difficult circumstances. Prior to the earthquake, there was a feeling that the world had forgotten about Syria. But if we can ensure that this does not leave people's minds, that people continue to talk about this work, to donate to the organisations that are doing this incredible work, to put pressure on their politicians to continue supporting this work, then hopefully we will not be in a situation in a month from now or a year from now where the world has moved on once again.
So what then does the world need to do?
It starts with funding, certainly. Times are tough around the world, but that support and that flexible long-term support is critical. But we also know the power of activism and advocacy and speaking up and raising awareness, and that is something that we can all do, is to, when you see these pictures on the news or when you hear these reports on the radio, is speak to your friends about it, speak to your family about it. Because the more awareness there is of the situation, I think the more empathy and humanity exists. And I think that grows. I really do. I think the more we tell these stories, the more we hear these voices, our ability to respond in kind increases with it.
Joe, you've been to places like this before, I know. When I ask you, a month on from these earthquakes, when I mention northwest Syria, when I mention Turkey, where does your mind go? To what incident, to what individuals?
I would like to see children back in school as soon as possible. In Turkey, it was incredible. The authorities have built playgrounds in every single one of these camps, so the kids have somewhere to be on a slide or swings. But getting them back into school is critical, because that gives them that hope for the future. That gives them that sense that there is something better coming down the road. And this is not an easy task, especially in Syria. A large number of children were not in school before the earthquake, and now we have that additional challenge of further displacement. But if we can do that, if we can be providing them with these spaces and with school books and with supplies and with teachers, then we're giving them the tools to create the better life for themselves.
Joe, I have to ask this. How do you get through days like the one you've just had? How do you do the job that you do? Because it's not just focusing on dealing with, the massive human cost of these natural disasters. You're very much focused on the children. And as soon as my mind starts to go in that direction, do you know what? I will freely admit I find my eyes welling up.
Yeah, no, I know that feeling well. Seeing the difference that the work makes, seeing how happy effectively for a short moment a child can be when you give them these pens and papers and they feel safe and secure, that is it. But also it's a privilege, honestly. So much of this work is a privilege, because we're getting to do what I think anyone would love to do, which is hopefully make children's lives a little bit better in the most difficult of times.
My thanks to Joe, and of course to you for listening to the Sky News Daily with me, Niall Paterson. This edition was produced by Emery Woodhouse with Alex Eden. Our editor is Philly Beaumont.